Imagine buying your first home, only to have your own parents drag you into court because they secretly promised your house to your sister. Yeah. That happened to me and they never expected what I did next. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I'm always curious to see how far these stories reach. Now let's get into it. I was 28, exhausted and holding the keys to something I never thought I'd have. A little blue bungalow on Marigold Lane. After years of double shifts as a paramedic and living in apartments where the walls felt thinner than paper, this house felt like breathing for the first time. I expected my parents to show up with balloons or at least a half-decent smile. Instead, when Hollis and Carleen stepped onto the porch, they looked like I'd personally offended them by succeeding. My mom's eyes did a quick sweep of the place, the same way someone checks a hotel room they're not impressed with. "Well," she said, tightening her jaw, "it's quaint." My dad offered a stiff nod and walked past me without a word, heading straight inside like he owned the place. And then Sylvie arrived. My older sister, professional golden child, walking embodiment of parental favoritism. She gave me a hug that felt more like she was checking my pockets. "So this is it," she said, smiling with that syrupy sweetness she used whenever she was about to say something awful. "I'm sure it'll make a great starter space." Starter space. Like I was borrowing someone else's property until a real adult needed it. I tried brushing it off. I'd spent too long fighting for this moment to let their weirdness ruin it. But every comment that day made something twist in my stomach. Sylvie kept touching the walls and asking, "So, what are your long-term plans for the place?" My dad wandered room to room, muttering numbers under his breath like he was mentally appraising it. My mom kept smiling at Sylvie like they were sharing some private joke. I didn't know what it meant yet. I didn't know why they acted like the house wasn't entirely mine. I didn't know they had already rewritten the story in their heads. One where my hard work didn't matter, one where my home wasn't really mine. All I knew was something was off, and I wasn't wrong. When I finally sat down with my parents a week later, it wasn't because I wanted a heart-to-heart. It was because Sylvie had been acting strange again and I was tired of trying to decode her smirks. She'd stopped by the house the night before, drifting through the rooms like she was inspecting merchandise. At one point she leaned against the doorway and said almost casually, "You know, there's a tradition in our family. The oldest gets first pick. It keeps everything orderly." I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. She just smiled, tapped the doorframe and said, "You'll figure it out," like she was offering advice instead of a warning. So I drove to my parents' place to get actual answers. Carleen was in the kitchen wiping down a counter that was already spotless. Hollis sat at the table reading mail he clearly wasn't absorbing. Neither looked surprised to see me, which irritated me more than anything. "I need to ask something," I said, dropping into the chair across from them. "Why does Sylvie think there's some tradition about who gets what in the family?" My mom froze mid-wipe. My dad's eyes flickered upward for half a second before returning to the envelope. That was all the reaction I needed to know something was being hidden. Carleen finally cleared her throat. "It's not a big deal." "Then explain it." She exchanged a glance with Hollis, the kind that always meant I wasn't going to like the answer. "Years ago," she started, slowly softening her voice, "we told Sylvie that down the line she'd have first choice of any property connected to the family. It was a gesture. She's the oldest." It made sense. I stared at her. "That doesn't include my house." "It's still part of the family," she said quietly, as if that made the sentence less outrageous. Hollis finally folded his papers. "We assumed you'd understand. It was supposed to be a flexible arrangement." "Flexible?" I repeated. "I bought that place. With my salary. My mortgage. My credit." Carleen sighed, almost annoyed. "We thought you'd be generous. We thought you'd keep the tradition alive." There it was, the expectation tucked inside a request that wasn't a request at all. And suddenly, everything Sylvie had been implying clicked into place. None of this was a misunderstanding. None of it was accidental. They'd made a promise behind my back, and now they expected me to honor it like some unwritten rule I'd broken by existing. For the first time I realized they weren't hinting. They were planning. They showed up without calling. Both of them standing on my porch like they were delivering bad news they'd practiced in the car. Hollis didn't even wait to be invited in. He brushed past me the moment the door opened, pacing through the living room like he was checking for something. Carleen followed, clutching her purse with both hands, eyes already glossy like she expected applause for whatever speech she'd prepared. I shut the door and crossed my arms. What's going on now? Carleen inhaled sharply as if bracing herself. We need to settle the situation with the house, she said, her tone stiff, rehearsed. It's time to do what's right. Sylvie is preparing for the next stage in her life. She needs stability. I blinked. And that has what to do with me. Hollis turned jaw tight. You should sign it over. She's starting a family soon. That place suits her future more than yours. It was so blunt I almost laughed. No. Absolutely not. My mom's mouth fell open like she'd never heard the word no before. Marin, don't be selfish. Think about everything we've done for you. Everything you've done? I repeated. Really? Carleen's eyes flickered with irritation. You're twisting this. We're asking for unity. This is about keeping the family aligned. Hollis stepped closer, lowering his voice as if gentleness would disguise the threat. If you cared about maintaining harmony, you'd cooperate. You're the one creating tension. There it was, my refusal magically turning into wrongdoing. But I moved back toward the kitchen counter, grabbing my phone and setting it face down. I'm not giving her my house. End of discussion. Carleen let out a shaky breath. You don't understand what refusing does. It breaks the structure we've upheld for years. That structure, I said, was never explained to me. You didn't need it explained, she snapped. You're supposed to honor it. Hollis crossed his arms. If you keep resisting, we'll have to take formal steps. Let's avoid that. Threats. Perfect. Something in me cooled. I reached for calmness, not for them but for clarity. Their tone, their tactics, the self-righteous pressure. They weren't negotiating. They were cornering me. All right, I said quietly. From now on, anything about this topic goes in writing. If you have something to say, text or email it. Carleen's eyebrows shot up. Why would you need that? Because I want a record. Hollis scoffed. Are you treating us like adversaries? I didn't answer. But inside, a decision settled like stone. If they were going to turn this into a battle, I wouldn't walk into it blind. I'd keep track of every word. And I did, starting that moment. The envelope was thick enough to feel wrong before I even opened it. The delivery guy asked for my signature, apologizing like he already knew what was inside. I tore the seal in the doorway, expecting some drawn-out guilt message from my parents. Instead, the first page hit me like a punch. A civil complaint with my own name listed as the defendant. For a moment, everything around me went quiet. Then the words sharpened into focus. Hollis Astor, Carleen Astor, and Sylvie Astor accusing me of acquiring the house with family funds I had supposedly been given for the down payment. They claimed the purchase was improper and should be voided so the property could be reassigned. I reread the lines over and over, hoping the letters would rearrange themselves into something less insane. The lie was so bold it felt surreal. Not 1 cent of that payment came from them. I'd saved every dollar through overtime, skipped vacations, slept on a lumpy futon for 2 years. And now they were acting like I had stolen from them. My stomach twisted as I kept flipping pages. They weren't just asking for recognition of some tradition. They were trying to strip the house out of my hands entirely. My house. The one thing in my life I had secured without anyone's help. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there on my porch, papers shaking in my hands, realizing exactly where I stood in their hierarchy. Somewhere between convenient and expendable. The first person I called was the only one I trusted with something this big. A lawyer recommended by a coworker. His name was Grant Ellery, and he picked up on the second ring. His voice was steady, professional, no surprise in it at all, like people calling him with disasters was part of his morning routine. When I told him what happened, he didn't react with disbelief. He reacted with suspicion. They coordinated this, he said immediately. No one files something this aggressive without preparation. He asked for scans of every document, every message, every detail I'd collected. Within the hour, Grant was sitting at my kitchen table, flipping through the stack of papers with a frown that deepened by the minute. This isn't just over a house, he said. There's something else motivating them. They're trying to build a narrative. I leaned back against the counter, the weight of everything settling in. Why go this far? Grant set the pages down and looked at me. Because they think they can win. And that was the moment I realized. They weren't just betraying me. They were trying to erase me. Grant arrived 2 days later with a laptop, a legal pad, and the kind of focus that made me realize he'd already started digging long before he knocked on my door. He spread everything across my dining table and asked me to walk him through every odd detail from the past year. Every strange comment, every tense visit, every moment that felt off before the lawsuit landed. As I talked, he typed, cross-checked dates, and pulled up public records. At one point he paused, tapped his screen, and said, "This is interesting." He turned the laptop toward me, showing a series of transactions tied to an account under my parents' names. Funds routed regularly to an account controlled by Sylvie. Quiet transfers. No labels. No explanations. "Looks like they've been funneling resources to her for a long time," he said. "This isn't new." The more he uncovered, the worse it got. My parents had created an arrangement years earlier labeled as future trust allocations, something never mentioned to me, all geared toward providing Sylvie with a financial cushion. There was no equivalent set aside for me, not even a token amount. Everything flowed in one direction. Then Grant opened another document, the expression on his face tightening. "You need to see this." It was a form submitted with the lawsuit, supposedly proving Sylvie had supplied part of my down payment. Except the signature attributed to me wasn't mine. Different loops, different slant, nothing about it matched my handwriting. He zoomed in. "This is fabricated," he said plainly. "And it wasn't done by your parents. This is her hand." I stared at the screen, a cold pressure settling behind my ribs. Sylvie hadn't just twisted a story. She'd created false proof and handed it to them, knowing they'd back her without hesitation. They didn't just allow it, they endorsed it. Grant kept going, pulling up planning documents my parents had filed for future tax purposes. Buried inside was a note that made everything suddenly horrifically clear. They had outlined a long-term plan to relocate themselves and Sylvie into my house after ownership adjustments. A neat phrase for removing me entirely. I felt something inside me click into place, a quiet shift from disbelief to clarity. They weren't trying to share space. They were preparing to replace me, physically, financially, permanently. Grant closed his folder. "They've been constructing this for a long time." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth sat right there between us. They hadn't just taken Sylvie's side. They had built the foundation for my removal, and expected me to never notice. The courtroom felt colder than it should have, all polished wood and echoing footsteps, the kind of place where truth seemed small compared to whoever spoke loudest. Sylvie sat at the plaintiff's table between Hollis and Carleen, her posture rigid, chin slightly lifted like she was preparing for a performance. Grant leaned toward me before things started and whispered, "Stay steady. They're going to overplay their hand." He was right. The moment testimony began, Sylvie launched into a story so rehearsed it barely sounded human. She claimed she'd contributed significant funds, that there had been a family agreement, that I had gone back on promises. Every phrase felt plucked from a script. When the clerk asked whether her statements were truthful, she said, "Absolutely," with a confidence that made my stomach twist. Hollis followed, acting like he had been forced into this situation reluctantly. He tilted his head and talked about disappointment and shock, as though I'd betrayed some sacred bond. Carleen dabbed the corner of her eye with a tissue, whispering about sacrifice and family loyalty, painting me as someone who had turned my back on them without cause. If I hadn't been sitting there, I might have believed they were describing a stranger. Grant didn't react once, not to the falsehoods, not to the theatrics, not even when Sylvie tried to choke up at the exact moment she described giving me financial support she never gave. He simply jotted notes and waited. When it was our turn, he stood calmly, almost casually, and began pulling their narrative apart one thread at a time. He started with banking reports. Precise, dated, undeniable. Then he presented the trust allocation records showing how all the financial benefits flowed to one person and never toward me. He let the silence sit after each document, giving the judge time to process exactly how calculated everything was. Then he addressed the so-called contribution paperwork. "Your Honor," he said, holding up the forged form, "this signature does not match any verified sample from my client. Additionally, it was submitted alongside a notarization stamp that expired 2 years earlier." The judge's eyebrows shot up. Grant continued, gesturing toward Sylvie. "And this filing was prepared using her personal email address. That's traceable." Sylvie's face drained of color. Carleen shifted, whispering urgently. Hollis stiffened like someone had grabbed his collar. The judge leaned forward, frustration now unmistakable. Mrs. Astor, the judge said, addressing Carleen, you understand the seriousness of presenting falsified information? Carleen opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again, stumbling over every word. By the time Grant finished, the courtroom had shifted. Their confidence had cracked, their story full of holes they couldn't patch. I kept my hands steady in my lap, breathing slowly, refusing to react as their carefully built facade collapsed inch by inch. The judge finally sighed long and heavy and said, I've heard enough. For the first time since this began, I knew the tide had turned. The judge didn't draw it out. After a brief recess, he returned with a stack of notes and a look that made everyone sit straighter. He glanced at the plaintiff's table first, then at ours, then delivered the ruling with a tone that left no room for interpretation. The claims against Ms. Astor are unsupported, contradictory, and based on misleading information. The court finds in favor of the defendant on all counts. Sylvie's shoulders collapsed instantly, as if someone had cut the strings holding her upright. Carleen inhaled sharply, eyes wide, frozen in disbelief. Hollis just stared forward, jaw clenched, refusing to show a single crack. But his silence said more than shouting ever could. The judge continued, directing his frustrations squarely at my parents. This filing demonstrates coercive intent. It shows a misuse of legal resources. I am issuing a formal reprimand for bringing a baseless action and attempting to manipulate this court with fabricated material. A murmur spread through the room. Carleen looked around like she couldn't understand how the world had stopped working the way she expected. Sylvie turned on her immediately, her voice trembling but loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. You told me this would work. You told me everything was lined up. Her words cracked and she grabbed her mother's arm. You said she wouldn't fight back. Carleen jerked away, whispering furiously, trying to hold on to composure while the judge watched with thinning patience. Hollis stayed stone still, eyes locked on the table as if looking at me might make something inside him unravel. The bailiff signaled the end of the session and people began filing out. I stood, legs unsteady but firmly rooted, while Grant collected the paperwork. He didn't say much, just gave me a slight nod that meant you did exactly what you needed to do. In the hallway, the tension finally snapped. Carleen spun toward me, voice sharp enough to cut. You've ruined our family. Do you understand that? She took a step forward, trembling with rage. You think this is a victory? You think this makes you right? You'll regret this, Marin. Hollis kept his distance, staring at the floor tiles like they mattered more than his own daughter standing 10 feet away. He didn't defend me, didn't defend her, didn't speak at all. Sylvie stood between them, mascara streaking down her cheeks, mumbling accusations at both of them, unable to decide who betrayed her more. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't respond. I just adjusted the strap of my bag and walked past them, each step steady despite the shaking in my hands. Their voices faded behind me, swallowed by the echo of the corridor. Outside, the air hit me, cool, sharp, grounding. My life had been dragged into a courtroom and dissected, but I'd come out standing. And as I walked toward the street, I felt something settle inside me, not relief, not triumph, just certainty. If they wanted a war, they had just taught me exactly how to fight one. I didn't go home to celebrate. I went home to plan. Distance was a given. After what they'd done, there was no version of my life where they were allowed back in. But disappearing quietly would have let them spin their own narrative. And after the lengths they'd gone to, I wasn't handing them that freedom. The first step was sending out a packet. Copies of the forged paperwork, the financial trail Grant uncovered, and the judge's reprimand. It went to every relative who had ever been looped into my parents' endless tales about family unity. I didn't add commentary. I didn't ask for anyone to take my side. I just let the documents speak for themselves. The reaction came fast. My Aunt Lenora called within an hour. She'd always been generous with my parents, helping them with bills and emergencies they never admitted to anyone else. Her voice shook as she read through the pages. They used my money to prop her up, she said, disbelief turning to anger. And then they tried to tear you down? Not 1 cent more, Marin. Not after this. By evening, cousins were messaging me, stunned, furious, confused. Years of carefully managed appearances burned up in a single afternoon. The pedestal my parents had built for Sylvie crumbled. replaced by questions they couldn't dodge anymore. But the real fracture happened on Sylvie's end. Her fiancé Mason reached out the next day. He asked if I could meet him. I agreed, mostly because his voice sounded hollow, not accusatory. He showed up at a cafe looking like someone who'd slept in his car. He slid a printout across the table, the same forged page she'd submitted to the court, and said, "She told me you gave her permission to use this." I didn't soften anything. I told him exactly what had happened, how she created a false contribution record, how my parents backed her without hesitation, how it nearly cost me my home. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he let out a quiet, stunned breath. "I knew she bent the truth," he said, staring at the table, "but I didn't know she could do something like this." He rubbed his forehead, eyes wet. "We were supposed to meet with a realtor next week." There was nothing more to say. He got up, thanked me for telling him directly, and walked out like someone whose entire future had just been erased. That night, my phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from relatives, panicked voicemails from Carlene, a curt text from Hollis telling me I'd gone too far. I turned the phone face down and let it vibrate against the countertop. Their world was unraveling, and for once I wasn't the one holding it together. They wanted a fight. They were finally getting one. I had never imagined that taking control of my own life would feel so heavy and yet so liberating. After the court ruling, I made a decision I had been putting off for years. I was done with my family. No more calls, no more visits, no more manipulation. When Hollis and Carlene showed up at my door that chilly afternoon, pretending it was just one more talk, I was ready. I welcomed them politely, my heart steady, and subtly started recording. Every word, every accusation, every attempt to twist the truth was captured. I let them ramble, let them flail, and when they finally crossed the line, I calmly told them they were trespassing and that I had called the authorities. Watching them fume, I felt only a flicker of sadness, not guilt. They had made their choices. Their chaos, entitlement, and insistence that I live my life by their rules were no longer my burden. I sent the footage straight to my attorney, a shield against any future attempts to control me. Meanwhile, Sylvie spiraled, insisting I had destroyed her life. I listened quietly, knowing the truth. I hadn't destroyed anything but the illusion that they could define me. There was a brief ache for what could have been. Not the family, but the connection I had hoped for, but I didn't let it sway me. I was finally free of manipulation, expectation, and compromise. After that, I threw myself into reclaiming my space. I renovated the house, transforming it into a home that was fully mine. Every brushstroke, every fixture, every corner reflected me and no one else. I built connections with neighbors and coworkers, a found family of people who truly supported me. I realized that love and loyalty could be chosen, not forced. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Carlene. I held it for a moment, feeling the familiar tug of old arguments and blame. But I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I fed it to the fireplace, watching the flames consume it, and I walked away. I wasn't filled with joy or relief. I was filled with clarity and strength. I had finally drawn the line, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to live entirely for myself. Every choice, every step, every boundary I had set was mine, and no one could take that away. I felt the weight lift off my shoulders as I settled into my life, truly mine for the first time. I laughed with friends who became family, I shared meals and stories with people who cared without condition, and I finally slept without dread. The past was still there, but it no longer had power over me. I had walked away not with anger or bitterness, but with certainty. I was whole, unshakable, and free. The house, my home, my sanctuary reflected that freedom. And for the first time in years, I knew I could face the world and myself without fear. Do you think I made the right choice by cutting my family out, or should I have given them another chance? I'd love to hear what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you want more stories like mine, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell.